Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 212th edition of the Frank and Stan chat. And I'm delighted to say that Sarah Davies has come back to join us. Hello, Sarah.
Hi,
Hello.
Sarah.
Hi,
Hello.
very handsome. Thank you for having me.
No, and thank you for joining us because I know we're a bit later in the day than well, evening. It's 7 o'clock ish. But I
It's
met Sarah.
past 9 o'clock.
Well, here we go.
That's
Here
fine.
it is.
Stan, you are enjoying that wine. I, however, am looking like someone who definitely has not survived until 7 o'clock. So I do send my apologies for that.
No. Well, Sarah and I met when she was speaking about Oracy when I in London at an event, and I was really struck by what she was saying, and so we connected. Sarah's been on before, and I thought it was really just about time we brought Sarah back to give us a bit of an update as to where she thinks we are with regard to the focus on Oracy, but also just how things going and catch up with what's caught her eye this week. So, Stan. Last week we were talking, one of the issues was about Salford Red Devils, and they were due to be taken over that day, but nothing in the news at all about it, Stan.
Nothing's happened. Nothing. Well, I don't know if anything's happened. Nothing has been released.
Right.
And it's not frighteningly quiet. It's the fact that nobody has got hold of it. Whatever decisions are being made, whatever negotiations are up, nobody's got hold.
Nobody knows.
There's a non-disclosure policy on it. So I understand that the club can't say anything, but it's very unusual for nobody to have shared an opinion or a view or a leak.
So for
So
those who weren't here last week, this is where actually the local rugby league club um,
yeah,
are under sort of a threat of actually going bust unless somebody buys them out. Is that right?
yeah, they're not. What's happened is they haven't got the cash flow because the stadium has only
Oh,
just
that's right.
been bought by the council and then given Salford access to be able to use it to raise funds. So, because of a lack of cash flow and because there was an expected income as a result, they've sort of signed players on the basis of what income they would have
Oh, yeah.
rather than what
Right.
they've got. And so the league have put a sort of rule out now that any club can come and buy Salford players. So
Right.
it's a real positive for Salford. However, fair play to Leeds because their manager has said, "We're not doing that. We're not being the vultures hanging around a team that's struggling."
Well, oh.
Real class from Brad Arthur.
Can I just bring this into education then and get your views on this now? So, what would happen if a school was in, say, special measures and it had financial difficulties? Do you think that it would be appropriate for other schools to, in effect, be poaching teachers from that school? You know,
Oh.
it's
Well,
the same sort of issue, isn't it? Really,
I can't see a situation. I'd struggle to see a situation where schools thought selling off their staff would raise income. Might reduce costs a bit. It doesn't raise
no, I
income.
meant more of the poaching rather than having been.
Yeah, but I think doesn't that happen all the time, Frank? I mean, we would call it promotion and advancement and everything
Yeah.
else, but the reality is that people move to the schools that they, I suppose, find most attractive.
Yeah, and I suppose the same will happen to Salford, won't it? Unless something's resolved here. Uh,
Yeah. Uh,
Sarah, go on. Let's move on to Sarah.
yeah.
Uh,
I was like, please don't ask me about rugby. I don't
no,
know.
no. When we spoke about you're an assistant head, aren't you, in a
I
school in
am, yeah.
Greater
Yeah.
Manchester, and we met over the issue of Oracy, and you
Mhm.
came on it. You're an author of a book talking about Oracy, available from all good bookshops, I assume.
Yeah.
But I mean, in a way, where do you think we are with this at the moment? Because when Jeff Barton produced that, or his committee produced that report, there was a lot of focus on it. Where do you think we are now with regard to this?
Well, it's always going to be quite an interesting one, isn't it? Because, obviously when I wrote the book in 2020, I do remember one of the things that we spoke about last time was the fact that actually Oracy was not necessarily something that was being recognized as a whole. And one of the things that I found myself obviously screaming from the rooftops with was this idea of you had the little pockets of good work and the good show on it, but what you didn't have was this kind of united understanding as to the reason why Oracy is so important to everybody. And it was only since obviously the Labour kind of introduction to it, to their 5-point plan originally, and then obviously, you know, the reinforcement of it once they got into that political power position, that we started seeing a bit more of a traction. Now it's still, like I mentioned before, about this slow moving traction in that way. We know it is, because obviously any kind of education reform it takes a substantial amount of time to do. But since the Oracy Education Commission obviously launched We Need to Talk, and they published We Need to Talk, you know, one of the biggest areas that they focus on is this idea of having a common shared understanding. And I think a prime example of that, I'm always one to say that, you know, as a school, you can't turn around and say that you are bringing in Oracy by having a debate club, right? Because actually that becomes tokenistic. It becomes one minuscule factor of a broader spectrum of areas. But actually, you know, what was quite interesting about that alone is the fact that, according to the Sutton Trust, for example, 18% of state schools have a debate club and 53% of private schools do. You know, and it's this exposure to Oracy that's so important. And it's this fact that the value of it is not necessarily something that is being promoted, particularly in the areas with a lower income demographic. And actually, those are the areas that it needs more of a focus and more of a drive going forward.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, I'm hoping that the France's curriculum review will give a little bit more of a shove in this area as well. And also, I know that we were talking just before we started recording about, exams and whatever. You know, that's the exam itself is quite a big driver, a focus target, isn't it? So if there was more focus on Oracy within the examination system, it would probably give it more weight and more focus in terms of its importance, shall we say.
Or you could suggest that Ofsted were going to just ask schools where they were at with the development of Oracy.
Well, that's quite interesting, because obviously hot on the press, I have been hearing from, like, we as a school are in the Ofsted window, which is an amazing window to be in. I feel like I need my blood pressure checking every single Monday. But we are in the, so obviously we do a lot of kind of, you know, talking to and speaking to other schools, and it is an area that is being picked up on more. I mean, obviously, I do remember the first time that I even heard about it from an Ofsted, where it had been dropped into a conversation, and what do you do to support Oracy in your schools? And I remember, because the sheer shock on someone's face that oh my gosh, is this a new thing that we need to do? What is this? How is this work? But one of the things that was spoken about in one was this idea about having an Oracy policy, and actually recognizing Oracy as a key driving point towards it. And that's something that really comes out of the commission report. It comes out of everything and that's what we want to really push going forward, this idea of Oracy becoming one of those, the fourth R, so to speak, and the fact that not only are we recognizing the value of it, but also teachers are being trained in it, and every single teacher is a teacher of Oracy. Like, getting back onto this idea of the exams, I mean, as an English teacher, and one of my driving forces for understanding Oracy was that the fact that it's an add-on at the moment. Let's be completely frank, it's an inconvenience. Absolutely 100%. It's almost something that's seen as a very tokenistic gesture. And it doesn't really encapsulate what Oracy is. In essence, it's just encouraging the students to make an audible noise. And that's actually part of the success criteria, is, are they audible? And it's when we look at the little nuances of it, it's very much not that driving force that A, that it used to be, and B, that's going to mean that it's going to have a substantial effect on them post-academia, which is actually where it needs to be.
Yeah, it's funny because when I think about, well, there's two bits here. are there some teachers you think who are really good at this, at developing oracy, but haven't really had it identified because it's not really been a focus? But is there also the point you're making there about how big a struggle is it going to be, not perhaps at your school, but at other schools, where teachers just feel as though this is just another thing? I can see this in history. That's a fantastic place, I would have thought, to enable the development of oracy, and argument and developing thinking. But actually, it could be as if it's another brick in the wall, another job to do, as opposed to it being something that is an integral part of making the wall,
Absolutely. And this is where, for the past few years, this is where it's gone so wrong, because of that exact fact. Because if it's not delivered properly to staff, and if that buy-in isn't there in the right way, of course it's seen as something tokenistic. Because I can, and I tell you now that what we've got in a world of wealth of like midterm plans and long-term plans, where everything needs to be in 20 different documents at the same time, and then this is how we're going to teach through all of these different administrative tasks. When you turn around to someone and go, right, okay, but we need to focus on oracy, in their head they're going, do I have to add another column to this program? And that is unfortunately what it will be for some people. For some people, it will be a case of, I'm going to get my midterm plan, I'm going to add another column, and where I'm introducing this component, I'm therefore going to use this skill. And it was very much, and that doesn't get the buying of the staff, because of course it's not going to get the buying of the staff, because it's seen as an additional task. And what we want to do is we want to shift that perspective and switch the narrative around on it, so that it's not seen as an additional task and an additional planning task to do, but actually it's an additional supporting mechanism. And it's that root of how are we going to support with the reasoning. And one of the the biggest focus points was this idea of how we can incorporate oracy in that, the learning to, which is that learning to talk, and this exploratory talk and the Socratic style of it. And yes, you're right, with history and with English, obviously we've got that, we've got all of those different areas for the learning through talk, so the reasoning of it and the articulation of it. But actually the ability to explain it, the ability to even have that communication between two people to talk it out, is, not only is it going to impact this idea of the fear of failure and the failure to launch, so to speak, when we talk about actually getting pen to paper in the first place, but also it's going to allow them to recognize the other skills that they need and how they can communicate in those skills later on. And one of the biggest shifts that I'm seeing, when I go into different schools, when I'm looking at different areas, is, we've got literacy perfected to an amazing amount, and we've got all of the different pedagogical strategies, and the students are learning, and that's all very well and good, but also, where are they communicating? Where are they actually allowing themselves to articulate their views? There's a lot of pen to paper, and there's a lot of teacher focus, but where is the dialogue happening? Where is the information being allowed to be processed in a way that might support those lower ability students, or might support those students that perhaps have the scruffier handwriting, our future doctors, not to generalize any of the doctors, but it's that kind of idea of allowing that verbalization to take place.
I agree. I mean, Stan, that leads quite neatly into what's caught your eye this week, if we can do the bridge, in that there's something here about being clear about what you've got, what you do need, and what perhaps needs to go in order to allow things to happen differently.
Yeah, that's a brilliant bridge.
I
don't know how you got that from me tidying my garage out today.
So it's tidying your garage out.
2 days I've been clearing the garage, and it's only a very small. It's not really a garage. It's a small area at the end of the utility room that used to be a garage. And it was time to get rid of a lot of stuff, and I had to be brutal, and things that I'd kept as treasures for years have had to go in the bin. 5 bin bags of treasure has gone, and I still found at the end today, just as I've finished, there's a big pile of stuff that I wasn't sure about. So all that's got in a box and gone in a bottom drawer. And I'll look at that another time. That'll be next time's treasure to dispose of. But it just makes me think. Somebody might call me a hoarder. I don't. I like to clear stuff out eventually, and I like order, even though I'm not good at it. I do like order, but I have got and still got, because they've not made it to the tip, 3 skyboxes, all of which are broken.
You always live in fear, though, that they are going to ask for those back. It is worth noting. I'm afraid of that.
That's the inspection
I've got
thinking.
Poor BT hubs as well, in case they ask for those back. But yeah, and that's why we keep. I think as leaders, we keep hold of things that we should really get rid of. But there's that fear of somebody might ask me, somebody might decide that's now important again, and I need to relive it, reinvent it. It made me think as well, with Frank giving the bridge that he did, that when I did one of these when I was a head teacher and decided, right, all this stuff that I've got needs to go. And I found loads of stuff as a teacher and thought, do you know what? I bet the staff would love this stuff. I went round distributing this rubbish to them. And then after about 20 minutes, I sat in my office and thought, what are you doing? And I went back up to everybody and said, just give it me. I'm going to put it in. Don't judge me on something I did 5 years ago.
Well, I think if I did that to my children, two of whom are teachers, they'd say, when was the last time you ever taught?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it's like me handing stuff out that I think is going to be of value to them. You know, actually things have moved on so much, haven't they? And I think the only thing I wouldn't get rid of is behind your head there are all these books, and I've got them over here as well. You never know. You never know when you're going to be needing to just bring something back. You know, so I'd never get rid of a book, but I would get rid of loads of. I think seriously about the planet.
What about all the original nuts and bolts from my MGB? I mean, there was a box with those in, the rusty ones that I took out and saved. They had to go. It's a tear in my eye as they went.
Yeah, one of the things at schools is that it's not. I mean, I was very poor at. You know, we've got a big initiative coming. What we're going to get rid of. I was always worried about getting rid of anything. You know, any sort of approach. I just was worried that was going to be the bolt that
I think
dismantled the machine.
I think it came from Scotland, this, but it's something I used to say when we were doing like school development planning with head teachers, to say you need to use the traffic light system, and the first thing is stop. What you're going to stop doing, and then amber, what you're going to keep doing because it works, and then what you're going to bring in that's new. But if you don't do what we're going to stop doing, you're just growing and growing and growing everybody's workloads.
I think it's sometimes hard as well, though, isn't it? Because, like, on the flip side of that, what if you did need that nut and bolt one day? Like, you know, what if you did need this?
That's why it's there.
And this,
he's going to be going back now to the tip to get all the stuff.
I know. Well, I mean, I'm going to throw this out there because he might need to go back to the tip for some of these, because then you've got on the flip side of this, those people, you know, the ones that come into establishments in particular and go, no, we're going to get rid of this, because all of a sudden, particularly if there's a stigma around the educational establishment as well, and if it's got a particular label, shall we say, what people are very keen to do is kind of go, right, well, we're going to remove absolutely everything because nothing of that works here, instead of actually just getting to the root of the problem. So maybe you don't need all the skyboxes and the BT boxes, but you definitely need the batteries that are inside them, like that kind of idea.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, in a way also, by having sweeping statements about we're getting rid of this or getting rid of that in any school setting, you underestimate how much reliance individual teachers have on elements that you think are important. You know, so you could actually be taking the rug from under them, you know, by actually saying we're not using that anymore. So it does get to the point.
To ask, right? Much better to ask what you know. What would you all throw out if you could do? You know. And apart from it being you as the head.
If that's the answer, it was not a good task.
Like a solicitor, never ask a question. Don't know the answer.
All assistant heads you can comment on, but not anybody above that. That's what they'll say, Sarah.
No, I don't like this task anymore. I don't feel like I'm going to fulfill the brief. But it is very much, and this is where staff buy-in is so important as well, because generally I do believe that staff can sometimes get, the more experienced the staff member as well, unless particularly CPD is sold to them for their specific purpose and their specific reason, then of course it's going to be very much a tick box exercise, a very monotonous task, because actually they're just going to think, all right, well, what new thing are we having this week?
Yeah.
And if we're not giving anything time to be embedded and implemented properly, but actually nurturing it to do so as well. So if we're not quality assuring it, if we're not making sure that we're having those discussions, then of course it's not going to work. And it's like all of a sudden there, you know, when you speak to practitioners that have tried something and they're like, well, I tried it once and then it didn't work, so I got rid of it. And it's like, well, have you nurtured it in any single way? Have you, you know, and it's that idea that really is so important to grasp. And once you do that, you generally have more staff on board with you anyway, because they know that if you are going to launch something, you've done your homework behind it and you're going to stick at it until you see that light at the end of the tunnel as well.
Yeah, that's
I can remember seeing a teacher who was struggling, let's say, and I said, so what's, you know, the children are not very well behaved in your class. What have you done about it? I said, well, I've tried 3 different things today and none of them have worked.
But those children as well must be flummoxed.
But it was interesting. We had Professor Malainsko on a, well, he's coming back in a couple of weeks' time to talk about a new book. But he spoke about the different types of approaches that you take towards teacher improvement, you know, and about, you know, he was basically saying, get rid of the quality assurance side of it, you know, just allow teachers to help other teachers. You know, that's really at the heart of it. And so many things are that there's an expectation that things will happen quicker than the teacher can actually enable them to happen. You know, and there are circumstances around the class, around the school, the teacher's circumstances, you know, all of those are playing out here. So it is an individual journey that these people are on, that colleagues are on, and that we just need to allow more time for people to see each other teaching without it being about judging anything.
And I think just moving that back onto the Oracy style of it as well, like, you know, just the ability to have those discussions with someone is the exact same as what we're expecting and hoping for our students in the classroom as well. It's that idea of they're going to get further on the journey if they've got that individual experience of it, and if they've got that individual opportunity to be able to provide that reasoning and that rationalization.
Yeah,
I've always advocated, though, if you're doing that, if teachers are watching teachers, somebody else should be there, because quite often teachers don't know what they're looking for and don't know what they're looking at, and you need somebody to say, did you see the way they did that, and did you notice that was like,
it's the nuances as well, isn't it?
Without that, you get one of my favourite ones where I'd asked a school to send a reluctant teacher to look at a teacher in my school, and afterwards I said, so what did you discover about it? And well, you've got carpets. Yeah.
This is it. But could you imagine if you turned around as a leader and said that was your QA processes? Oh, don't worry, we've got a rigorous QA progress. We make sure that all of our staff go in and they QA each other and they talk about and they provide specific, you know, targets. And then you look at it and that target is to make sure that the carpet is vacuumed at least twice a week.
You know, we did when we first did walkthrough with a group. And we asked them to go into a school and do a formal walkthrough. The first thing they said was they thought the table in the entrance hall should be moved a little bit to the right.
But you did ask them to be really clear and explicit.
It was an achievable outcome.
That'll make a big difference.
Hey, let me move on. What about what's caught your eye this week then, Sarah? I mean, you were talking about the Oracy bit, but I think there was something in exams or something.
Well, this just in, obviously released
hot off the news, hot
off the press. So the AQA have released their 2026 delivery for English language. I mean, we had high hopes. It's particularly, like what I've said earlier about the fact that the real driving force of the Oracy Education Commission was really looking at how we can incorporate more of that spoken language in there. It's not necessarily been anything big news, so to speak. There's been little nuances to the questions. There's been little changes to the questions that have actually helped. One of the things that I spoke about as an English teacher, the most frustrating thing at the start of this process, when the actual exam paper was launched, was there was a bit of ambiguity in it, and as there always is going to be, until we've got more mark schemes, more examiners reports, and everything like that along the way. So the best way that I can describe it is the first year that students got an image, it was like, okay, describe the wall and describe the puddle and describe the lampshade. Right, fabulous. And then the examiner report has said that it's lacking in that style and structure. Okay, now you're going to describe the wall from the perspective of the puddle. And now you're going to do it from the perspective of the lampshade. And then the next one came along that was like, well, and it's tweaked along the way to the point where, I as a teacher now, I'm literally just saying, look, just show your skills. Just pick a genre, pick a structure that you feel like you can show off the best of their skills of, and just slightly bend it to the question. And actually what they've done now is they've used that word imagination to support and to actually say to students, use this as a springboard, so to speak.
Yes.
It doesn't have to be the be all and end all, because we've all been there when we've looked at a picture on the board and you've got those really pedantic, all of a sudden your students are really pedantic and astute, and they're like, is that a red or a blue coat? And it's like, it could be pink, love, it could be whatever color you want to. And they're almost doing it like a spot the difference question. But the one that does slightly, not necessarily concern me, but the one that does intrigue me is definitely the question one, which actually used to be a list four things question, and now they've embedded more vocabulary in there. And what I find quite interesting is our students are going to have a real grasp on that tier 2 vocabulary to be able to answer that question. So whereas before it was a simple extraction exercise, now there's an element of tier 2 vocabulary that makes me slightly, not necessarily uneasy, but makes me think about the National Literacy Trust's recent surveys that obviously found that distressing idea that only a third of our students actually read outside of school. So they're not acquiring that there. We know for a fact from previous papers that words like mooring have been used in there, and century, and they've got to have that grasp of that vocabulary in order to process the information properly. So I question whether it has slightly made it harder, despite the fact that the sales pitch on it is that it is now easier and more accessible for the students. But actually, I think given the results that we're getting recently from all of the surveys and the assessments, has it made it harder? And this is going to be one of those where it's only 2026 will tell.
Yeah, and also again, it can't be made too easy and it can't be made too hard. The whole process will allow itself to stabilize so that the results can be consistent from one year to the next. But
maybe, Frank, not consistent from the disadvantage to the advantage.
No.
Is that?
Yeah. And this is where we, and it goes back to all of the words that we found out about the fact of how many students, how many words. I think it was 3,000 words every single year that a student has to acquire in order to progress at an age expectation to the next grade.
Right. Wow.
So when we're looking at things like that along the way as well, we're leaving a lot, and it's like Stan's just said about the gap.
Yeah, you're not going to get that unless you're doing a heck of a lot of reading, though, aren't you? Independent reading, creative reading,
10 new words a day.
Yeah, well, we've got. Having said that, I am nailing Duolingo at the moment, and I am learning at least 4 new Spanish words a day. But that doesn't mean that I'm going to sit a Spanish GCSE at the end of this.
But if you did do a Spanish GCSE, there would be an oral part of the test.
Absolutely, and that, but that's the frustrating thing about it all, really, isn't it? Is the fact that actually, when we're doing the modern languages assessments, a lot hinges on that the Oracy style of it, and a lot hinges on that way of assessment. And yet, when we're doing our English and there is a lot less of an ownership on spoken language, which is something that I think everyone that advocates for Oracy as an explicit the explicit recognition of it is very much keen on seeing it brought out more within the curriculum and within everyone's curriculum in a certain way, but definitely from the assessment perspective within English language.
Yeah, I agree. Well, what's caught my eye is, I wouldn't say excessive, but very, very high salaries for people who are working in education. So it was leaked to Schools Week, I think, today, that
Yes.
the CEO, we don't want to name particular CEOs, but a CEO of a London-based academy trust had received a £25,000 a year pay rise, taking that salary above £500,000 for the year. Now, I don't know, but I don't know where others sit on this, but I wrote I had something in Schools Week in 2018, 2019, which when I was interviewed by them, I said, well, I don't think you need to pay them £450,000 to get a decent CEO. That was the point I was making. And in effect, what this is saying now is that you need to pay this person that salary in order either to retain them or that their work is of such an exceptionally high standard that actually it's going to require that sort of salary to either retain them or to get somebody new, or that's what they're worth. And actually, I can't quite work out, Stan's always better at this, but I always try and work out how many teachers that is. How many teachers that is. And I know
for me, it's an easier one to say that's 500,000 or whatever it is that isn't being spent on children.
Yeah.
Directly.
Yeah. And I think when I was a CEO, we had a situation, I've raised this before, where my salary could never be more than 10 times the salary of a full-time, the lowest paid member of staff. So that was basically, I suppose, the national living wage, or we pay at the slightly higher level than that. But that put a sort of ceiling on it, and I was always at 8 times, or so that always felt to me quite a comfortable position to be able to sort of talk to others about, I know I'm the highest paid person in the trust. It's up to you whether you think I'm worth it. But actually, it wasn't so excessively high that many people thought, bloody hell, that's a good salary, isn't it? And my father would be astounded to think that I would earn that, if he was alive, that salary. Bearing in mind, what he was earning, and you think, yeah, but there is a point at which it all becomes a bit self-congratulating. That it all becomes just about the salary, because if it wasn't just about the salary, couldn't that CEO just say, well, I'll take a cut of £250,000?
Yeah.
Here, take a cut of £250,000 and still be earning £250,000 a year. I mean, I just find all of this is just, we're not seeing it as a service anymore. It's not an education service, is it? It's more of a sort of like, it is that sort of it's a commercial, I hate the word capitalism, but it's a capitalist world. I mean, it's as if I can get the money, I deserve it, whatever. I just don't view it in that way.
It's like they said about the city, though, when the highly paid bankers and gamblers with our money were paid. When they analysed it, it wasn't about how much they were getting. It was that they were getting more than the guy sat in the next seat.
Yeah.
That was the important bit for them, not what the salary range was. But I need to get more than him to show that I'm better valued. I'm better than him. Blah blah blah. And I guess there's an element of that in it now that we've lost sight of. I mean, before we had CEOs of groups of schools, what would a head of children's services be on?
Well,
They'd be very lucky if they were on 100,000.
Yeah. Well, they were always earning more than I was as a primary head. But nowadays.
But it's also, Frank, it's causing a problem with roles within the education service. I mean, we've talked before about HMI used to be the sort of pinnacle of your career. and now it's a stepping stone onto to something else. So you have quite a rapid turnover, and it's also, I think, true that at other levels in education, I know someone's trying to get a director of primary education and can't find somebody who wants to do that role because they could get a job as a CEO and get twice as much money. Or
Yeah, I mean, this is just. I mean, as I've probably explained, I've not really worked it through myself. It's more around. It feels more equitable. You know, having some sort of, because the government, you know, came under attack, didn't they, for the bill which actually suggested, and I don't think it was ever their intention, that there wouldn't be a floor. You know, the idea here is that they were to bring the floor to a standard level. I think I personally think it's a shame they've not actually put some sort of top on it. You know, basically, I think it's excessively inflationary, potentially just driving stuff away from the front line. And I wonder whether I'm just too old for all of this now. You know, and actually my values aren't quite aligning with others. But I do, when I've talked to people, I do feel as though many people feel the same as me, but actually feel unable to speak publicly about it for fear that they might be criticised. And to be honest, I think when we're on these chats, Dan, I don't really care anymore because actually this is, and I know that people like Sarah and people who've currently got jobs have to be very careful, and she's right not to comment at this point, isn't she? You know, so well done, Sarah. But for us, if we can't say it, Stan, you know, I mean, there's nobody else that, you know, very few people can or seem willing to be able to say it. Anyway, so well done, Sarah, for not commenting. That's
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Well, believe it or not, that's nearly 40 minutes of a chat. It's amazing.
Oh, wow. Time flies.
I know. But thank you so much for joining us. And you will be sent, because you didn't get it last time, the new Frankenstein mug, which you can take, and everybody when you're on.
A genuine gasp of excitement. That was like being on the
but
it just flew back.
Safe. It's safe. You can take it round. It's got
it's got a sippy cup.
It has, and actually, everybody's going to be wanting to know who are Frankenstein, who have you been chatting to. You have to tell them.
Excited.
But thank you for your time, and thank you, Stan.
Thanks, Sarah.
Yeah,
thank you both.
We'll hopefully see you all being well next week. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.